I want to talk with you today about the centrality of empathy and how it's such an essential ingredient in maintaining healthiness in our primary relationships. Now, I want to give you an illustration first. My wife is a classically trained musician, and through the years, she's taught choirs. She came home one Saturday after she had been to a convention and talked with me about a choir she observed and how something really special happened. Now, these young students were singing a beautiful melodic classical piece, and in an unrehearsed way, as they were singing, they began swaying with each other. You could just tell that they felt the music and they felt it together, and they just were in harmony with each other, and the music was coming out in a wonderful kind of way. Well, the director didn't want to mess that up, and so rather than continuing his directing, he just put his arms down by his side, stepped into the front row, and he too just began singing with them and swaying, and they all just continued singing the song in complete harmony with each other. But it was not just harmony of notes or sound, it was a harmony of the spirit. They were completely with and into one another. There was an immersion that happened. And then when the song was finished, the entire auditorium went silent. And as my wife was telling me about this, she was saying the beauty of all of that is we were all with one another. We felt with each other, and there was just this sense that says, we're together here. And when she told me, it's like, oh man, I wish I'd have been there. And she was teared up as she was telling me about that. Now, that's ultimate empathy, where you can become so immersed in the experience with someone else that you just lose yourself as you go into that other person's experience. Now, I don't know that we can go quite that far, but I do hope that as you engage with people in your world, that you could aspire to being somebody that says, I want to be somebody that knows how to go into someone else's experience and then feel it with them and perceive it with them from their vantage point. That's not an easy thing to do. Now, I've come up with 9 characteristics or behaviors, perhaps we can say, or adjustments in our mindset that might help us find that place of empathy where we learn how to tune into someone else's feelings and perceptions and needs in such a way that says, I'm in there with you. Now, a first ingredient that we want to maintain when we are trying to be an empathetic person toward one another is we need to learn how to contain our own personal egos. Each one of us has a certain amount of self-centeredness. It's like, well, I feel a certain way. I would do things a certain way. I would handle things in my own manner. And then you see someone in front of you who's not the same as you. Rather than thinking, well, I want you to come over to my style in your selfishness, it's like, wait a minute. This is not about me. My ego is not the only one in the room. There are other people here too. I wonder what's going on inside of them, which then takes us to a second primary thought that goes along with with empathy, and that is embrace your humility. You want to be known as somebody that has a courteousness about you. You want to have a kindness. You want to be a serving kind of a person, someone who has an appreciation for the other individual. And it may be that the feelings or the emotion or the perceptions that the other person has are not of the pleasant variety. They may be feeling angry, or they may be feeling perplexed or disinterested. But in humility, it's like, there's a reason you're feeling that way, and since it's not all about my ego, I'm just going to lay it down. And I do want to know, who are you? What's going on inside? You can't do that when you're in a prideful kind of a spirit. Well, and then that leads to a third element that goes into the making of empathy, and that is seek to recognize what might be reasonable to that other person. Now, they may have feelings or preferences or interpretations that you think, I don't think that I would have come up with that, but that's where that person is. To them, in that moment, it seems reasonable to them. And it may be that you're dealing with a kid or a spouse or a family member or a person at work, and they're approaching things in a way that doesn't make any sense to you, rather than saying, here's what you need to learn from me so that it does start making sense. And there can be a time for that, by the way. Before you go there, though, it's like, what about this experience makes sense to you? And what is it in your perspective that I might need to know so that I can learn how more to harmonize with you? That's not common, but that's what empathy can lead you to, and that can be a very effective way of having influence. Or a fourth element that goes into the making of empathy, and that is stay open-minded as opposed to being agenda-driven. So many people have an idea of how everything is supposed to line up and what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to go. There's a certain way things need to be around here that becomes their primary focus. You ever think that way? I know I can sometimes. Well, the open-minded person says, sometimes life doesn't play out according to an agenda. Sometimes it just shows up, and people have their uniqueness and their differentness. I want to have an open enough mind that says, even though I feel correct about where I am, there's where you are. What might I be able to know about you? Well, that leads to a fifth ingredient that goes into the making of empathy, and that is you need to learn how to think creatively. When you're trying to be empathetic, you might have to think, now, because my mind doesn't go where your mind is, I need to get out of my box, and I need to realize there's something else going on here, and so it requires you to bring in some of your creative or your nuanced way of looking at people. What's going on here that I am not necessarily familiar with or even comfortable with, but that I could actually learn to tune into. It's not natural, but it can be done. Or how about a sixth characteristic that's part of empathy? And that is, as you engage with other people, bring a lot of patience with you. Differences are just going to surface, and spontaneous moments are going to happen. And if you're over there thinking, well, I've got a certain way things need to play out, and you're really impatient about how life is supposed to be, then that impatience is going to ruin the moment. Be patient. All right, there's some stuff that we need to sift out here. There's some feelings, there's some perceptions that we need to look into. I've got the time. Let's talk it through. I want to know you just as I would hope you'd be willing to take some time to know me. Or a seventh ingredient that goes with empathy, and that is stay curious about others. What makes that person tick? What is it about them and their unique experiences in life and their background and their life circumstances that might make them think or interpret life a little bit different from me? I like to know those things. Number 8, in terms of maintaining empathy, minimize your inclination towards complaining or criticizing. When you engage in relationships with an attitude of a critic, you're not going to be a very bonding person now, aren't you? Which then leads to point number 9, and that is maximize your desire to expand your views about how life plays out. So these are some of the characteristics that can be a part of an empathetic mindset. That choir master who was conducting the students didn't really expect for the swaying to happen. But instead of saying, stop the music, I've got a way we're going to do this, and this wasn't it, let's start over, which is the way a whole lot of us do our relationship. It's like, I can go in there with you, and I can think and perceive from your vantage point. Now, empathy is relatively easy when people are being, exactly the way you want. But even when people are being contrary, when they're being argumentative, or when they're expressing opinions or attitudes that you just aren't going to agree with, you can still slow down long enough to know life from that person's perspective. Empathy doesn't mean you have to condone or agree with, but it does mean that you say, I want to know you. So it implies acceptance. It implies even a celebration of differentness. It implies acknowledging uniqueness. And it also is driven by a desire to merge your life with other people. Let's just kind of go with the notion we're always going to be different from one another. And so that being the case, can we start with the notion that says, well, then let's learn how to coordinate in the midst of our differences. Would you be willing to do that? If so, you're going to be going pretty deeply into the notion of empathy. Now, I hope these videos are something that stimulate you and give you something good to think about. I would encourage you to go beneath and hit that subscribe button if you'd like to know of more videos that come along. You'll also notice beneath the video that we have links to some of my books and some online workshops that you might avail yourself to. Just know that I'm privileged to be here with you as you're going along your journey. Thank you for letting me be along on the journey with you. Now, keep in mind that Dr. C, DRC, stands for dignity, respect, civility. Dignity, respect, civility. Let's see if we can learn to live in such a way where those kind of ingredients come to the forefront.